Hey everybody, Kenny with T7 Woodworks here. Today we're doing two end grain butcher blocks, and they're going to be a little different this time. So stick around to the end of the video and you'll see why. Alrighty, so these boards are going to be made up of cherry, maple, duke, and purple heart. I am measuring all of them based on the shortest plank I have, which is the purple heart. This allows for equal length glue up between my pieces, and by cutting it to length first, it prevents unnecessary waste of these materials. Now that I have everything rough cut, I can take all of my material over to the jointer to get my edges clean and straight. This is an important step so that when I take them over to the table saw, it will ensure that the cut sides of all my material is perfectly parallel to the reference side that I just created on the jointer. Typically, you'll hear me say, pay attention to your end grain structures before you make your cuts. And yes, definitely do that. But for these boards, I sort of abandoned that rule, because I was going for something a little different. But the end grain structures that I was left with did play a role in how I organized each piece when I placed them in their final orientation. After all that and some edge cleanup that wasn't recorded, I was left with enough material for two boards. The idea I was rolling with here was to make both boards very similar, but not alike. You'll see why I did that shortly. A quick word to the wise here. Plan your glue ups first. In my opinion, it's likely one of the more important steps in butcher block creation you can take. Trust me on this one. If you like the things I'm doing over here on this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really helps out my channel and allows me to continue growing and generating content to share with all of you. I find it important to clean off all of the dry glue drips before running your boards through the planer. A good way to avoid having to take this step is to wipe it all away while the glue is still wet, but that can be a messy process for the larger glue ups. So for these, I like to hit them with the handheld belt sander. It only takes a few minutes per side, and you save a ton of shop towels in the process. Here I'm just cleaning up a little bit of snipe and rough edges left over from the planing process. Now we need to determine the dimensional sweet spot for the finished boards. This will be based on the dimensions of the current boards we have. And what I mean by sweet spot is how thick can I make the finished boards while achieving a desirable and proportional target length for them as well. You can do all this prior to your build. You probably should, but I didn't. And for those of you who might not know what kerf loss is, it is the amount of material you lose based off the thickness of your blade per cut. So in my case, my blade thickness is 0.1 inches, so that is how much I lose per cut. There's a term in whiskey making called the devil's share, and I think that's appropriate here as well. So now I'm setting up my table saw sled to 1.5 inches, which is what I determined to be the dimensional sweet spot. A sweet little trick I learned from one of Brad from Fix This Build That videos was to use a pencil to hold down your cut piece. Believe it or not, I didn't have a pencil with an eraser in my shop, so I used a Sharpie, but the eraser is supposed to give it a nice little grip and hold it in place for you. The Sharpie worked okay. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned that I wanted the two boards to be similar but not exact. Well, here's why. With my shop lacking a proper drum sander, I like to go through and lightly sand all faces of each piece with 220 grit sandpaper. This removes any remaining burrs that are hanging on from the previous cuts, while giving each piece a smoother contact face and a tighter seam for the coming glue-up. So this time I'm actually wiping it up. This is because the surface area on this particular glue up is much smaller than the first glue up for these boards. When working with end grain boards, it's important to add a sacrificial piece to one end of the board. Typically, this ends up being one of your old cut-off pieces, which is what I'm using here, but it can certainly be any piece you have lying around your shop. You just need to make it into the same dimensions as the end of your board. We'll go ahead and cut it off when we're done with it. With the sacrificial piece in place, we're going to quickly round over the edge of it. This is going to help prevent any tear out you'll typically see when you run end grain boards through the planer, even though any tear out that would occur on the sacrificial piece. You still want to prevent it as much as possible. This will ensure that it doesn't creep into the main board. I learned this trick from a video by T7 Woodworks. It's also worth noting that running end grain boards through your planer probably isn't the best practice. Ideally, you would want to use a drum sander for this job, but as you know, my shop lacks one. So with that said, if you have to do things the wrong way, at least do it the right wrong way. Earlier in the video, I made a few initial cuts at the joiner with my rough cut material. This created one perfectly flat face on each piece, allowing me to get a perfectly parallel and square cut when I brought it to the table saw. Well, the same principle applies to these cuts. We're now just bringing the boards into their final dimensions. There is a particular look I sort of started gravitating to for most of my cutting boards. Certainly not saying I developed this look, but it's something I definitely lean towards when producing boards, and it applies itself well to a variety of board thicknesses too. I tend to go for big rounded corners and bottom edges, but I like to keep the top surface untouched. The only rounding over of any kind on the top surface is applied just with sanding to knock the sharp edge down. I believe this adds a certain kind of visual contrast to the board's shape, as well as making it appear more stout and durable, which my eye finds appealing. I like to use a square to mark out the placement of my handholds. Then I take the measurements over to the router table and set up my stop blocks, based on the markings I put on the board. I find this scraper to be one of the more valuable tools in my shop. It eliminates so much time sanding out the burns you get from routing out juice screws. If you're interested in one, check them out. I'll drop a link in the description below, along with many other items I use in this video. And If you use the provided link to buy anything else in there, I'll get a small kickback, and it will make you an awesome human. Remember I said I was going to do something a little different for these boards? Well, there it is. Introducing Wildboard, the new brand under the T7 Woodworks banner. We think the wild boar is about as rugged, durable, and resilient as an animal can get. It's no secret why we chose that tough critter to represent all of our cutting boards and butcher blocks. We believe all those attributes apply to our cutting boards too. Going forward, all butcher blocks and cutting boards will be branded as Wild Board. I want to thank you for sticking around through the duration of this video. If you enjoyed what you saw, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss the next upload. Feel free to check out the shop at T7Woodworks.com. It can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest at T7 Woodworks. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.